Okay. Well, first I would like to start with the Peruvian case. There is just now, I think in the beginning of August, in the copy, found that 5 companies of liquid petroleum gas have been making agreements about the prices in order to increase them. What do you think, or how would you analyze this situation, like, but basically cartels or enterprises that basically lack of regulation or the country in itself have a deficiency in regulations with this? How would you analyze why does this happen?
Okay, so is the question to this specific case how to analyze that case, or more broadly how to kind of determine whether or not there's cartels out there and how to handle them?
First broadly and then analyze it, please.
Okay. Well, one of the real challenges obviously with cartels, and I think in jurisdictions such like as Peru and many other, really most countries in up to 20 years ago, did not have competition laws, and if they did, they weren't well enforced. In those countries, there probably were a lot of cartels. I mean, I think particularly in industries where the products tend to be somewhat homogeneous, price competition can be very intense, particularly with intermediate goods, like the liquid gas and cement and paper and glass and so forth. If firms don't collude, competition is really intense, so there's a tendency for them to collude. And if there's not strong enforcement against that, well, that's all the more reason for them to cartelize. So I think we start from a point, if you've just introduced a competition law recently and just starting to enforce it, I think you're probably in an environment where there's most likely a lot of cartels out there. Now, the big challenge, of course, is cartels hide themselves. So the question is, how do you learn about those cartels? One avenue, obviously, that countries have pursued is leniency programs. That if a cartel member comes forward and they're the first one and they fully cooperate with the authorities, they'll have typically a full reduction, a full relief of penalties, or at least a partial relief. Now, that has, I think, worked in some jurisdictions, but what's really important there is that there are sufficiently severe penalties so whereby a company is concerned with being convicted and having to pay full penalties. And a lot of countries who have recently kind of introduced competition laws, the penalties don't tend to be that severe, and that weakens the power of the leniency program. So then now we're back to the issue, well, how do we go about discovering these cartels? There's no kind of one way to do so. I think pursuing customer complaints is a really important avenue. That's also a matter of educating customers, and in most cases these are industrial buyers, so they're fairly sophisticated customers. I think a competition authority can play a role there in terms of getting out material and educating industrial buyers what to look for regarding cartels. For example, to look for kind of uniformity in prices, along with prices that are very stable. To look for customer allocation schemes, so that's where the cartel basically divvies up the customers among themselves. And so what that might mean is that if I'm an industrial buyer and I'm buying from firm A, I try to get a price quote from firm B tells me, oh, I don't really have any capacity or any product in inventory to sell to you, or gives me a price quote which is just really absurdly high. So there's a whole list of things that a competition authority could convey to industrial buyers. And I really think that's the first line of defense for discovering cartels. Is the customers themselves.
Okay. In our country, we basically have few enterprises that are mostly monopolic in certain areas, of course. And also there's very little regulation. So what do you think would be best, or how would you qualify these two options? Like, what do you think would be best? Like, increase the enterprises or have more severe laws?
So increase the number of firms that are out there?
Yeah, of competitors.
Uh, Probably really the latter, to have the kind of tougher laws, yeah, and both in terms of the type of behavior that's prohibited and the penalties, that are associated with being found guilty. And basically because I guess I'm of the perspective that one wants to have, I think, minimal government intervention in economies. I think markets on the whole work reasonably well. But we know there can be certain problems. There can be problems because of cartels. There can be problems because of asymmetric information. Consumers don't have some information that they need, and governments can play an important role in terms of reducing that. But I think you want to have the kind of minimum amount of intervention, because rely upon markets and firms that come up with innovative new ways to solve problems, new products, and so forth. And the more government constraints there are, the more difficult that becomes. So where this comes back to, in terms of your question, to actually have more firms in the market would require fairly heavy government intervention. It would mean coming in and perhaps subsidizing firms to enter. But it's not clear that that's really going to be a kind of a worthwhile activity. We want firms to enter because they find it profitable to do so, and they think they can make profit in the long run. If they only enter because of government support, they may only be viable as long as that support is there. So I would say, don't encumber entry or exit decisions where you don't think there are any issues with regards to firm behavior. Leave firms alone, and then focus very intensely and severely on the areas where there really is concern, such as cartelization, inclusive behavior, and have put in a lot of resources in terms of enforcement, and when you find these firms guilty, to have very heavy penalties.
What do you consider a very heavy penalty? Because here, the state basically asks for money, but that is something that enterprises can afford. So what would you propose for a tougher regulation?
I think that, let's just say, in the U.S., and I believe in the U.S. penalties, there's kind of three sources of penalties. Two types of corporate penalties, which is government fines, which you want to have at a fairly high level, and then customer damages, so that the customers can sue companies who have colluded or engage in other antitrust violations, such as exclusionary activities. They can sue them in courts for compensation. I think those are very important instruments to really as part of deterrence, because I think that's any policy. We obviously want to shut down cartels that are currently active, but we really ought to think about a policy which deters cartels from forming. I mean, that's really the real goal here. And so you want to have those very severe corporate fines and damages, so that when a firm thinks about forming a cartel, they say, well, there's a reasonable chance we'll be caught and convicted, and there are these very large financial penalties associated with it, and because of that, we're going to choose not to form a cartel. That's really what we're trying to achieve. Now, there's the other source of penalties, which is somewhat unique to the U.S. A few other jurisdictions are starting to pursue them, which is individual penalties, and in particular incarceration. So right now in the U.S., let's see, I think the average prison sentence is 2.5 years for price fixing. There's a maximum prison sentence of 10 years. I think this is, I'm actually all for that. I mean, these cartels create a lot of harm to consumers. We want to deter them. Corporate penalties is certainly very helpful towards that, but I think we need to hit individual managers, where it really hurts, and that's to put them in prison. Realistically, though, it takes a while to kind of get to that point. It took a while for the U.S. to actually start putting people in prison. I mean, it took many decades. So I think I would say, you start with corporate penalties, make sure that they're large enough whereby firms, if they are convicted, regret having colluded. You take the vitamins cartel, a global cartel. They were convicted, they paid what seemed to be large fines, they paid large customer damages. The best estimates are that after all that, at the end of the day, they still made money on the cartel. You know, even though they were caught and paid penalties. So penalties were simply not big enough. So you got to make penalties big enough so that the firms regret having colluded.
Okay, I see. So we have a special case here because a big portion of the market is actually informal. It's not regulated or simply don't want to be under these laws and pay taxes. And you know, how can, I mean, in the case of the making or in case that there are informal markets, how can we track this problem and how can we solve it? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a challenging one. Yeah, I guess I don't. It's not what I've kind of thought carefully about, but it seems like you have to create some reason for some benefit for the companies to enter the formal sector. You know, because you described a whole lot of costs from being in the formal sector. Okay, there's going to be a lot of government bureaucracy you're going to have to deal with. There's going to be taxes you're going to have to pay. So if it's all costs, then you know it makes a lot of sense they stay in the informal sector. So maybe you have to think about what kind of benefits can we offer. You know, maybe there's certain types of protection, legal protection that we can provide that will make it attractive to join the formal sector. And because I think that's what one has to do. Enforcement where you go and look for companies in the informal sector is most likely to pick up a very small fraction. So I think you have to think more about providing incentives to them to actually want to join the formal sector.
I see. So can you please compare the case of Latin America in general with this kind of regulations in order to avoid the cartels with a case of the most, like USA and Europe, please?
Okay, so I would say Latin America is most, I mean, if I think about it, is kind of probably where the U.S. was earlier in their history with regards to competition policy. As I said, there's a time path to this. It's not as if you put in a competition law and now everything starts. You have exactly the policy you want. There's an evolution to it. So if I think about it, there's right now I would say there's probably a kind of, and this is not just true in Latin America, it's also true in a lot of European Union countries. There's kind of a cultural gap between them and the U.S. And what I mean by that is, I think for a long period of time in these countries, collusion was seen as somewhat of an acceptable practice. Maybe borderline unethical, but still somewhat acceptable. I think that's true in Latin America, true in many European countries, true in Japan and other countries. And true originally in the U.S., if you go back a century. So you have to somewhat start changing attitudes of the managers in terms of, no, this is an unlawful, unethical activity. And that's going to take time. You need to change the perception of the public with regards to this activity. I think that's a big, a obstacle that has to be surmounted in order to be able to justify putting people in jail, is that the public, the politicians, the legislators, they see this as actually a very harmful activity that warrants putting people in jail. That doesn't happen overnight, So I'm sure a lot of countries, and I know this is true in my interaction in the EU, they just think that, well, yes, collusion's bad, but it's not so bad as to put people in jail. But you have to think it from the perspective of, once again, the goal of competition policy is not to punish, it's to deter. It's to deter firms from engaging in these activities. And so you need the threat of severe penalties in order to do so. And these cartels, it's they can create a lot of damage, and a lot of damage to also the less fortunate people in society. I think of, for example, the bread cartel in South Africa. Okay, well, poor people rely upon being able to buy bread at reasonable prices, and they were harmed because of this cartel. So that's a very serious harm. Now, you take the fine arts auction houses cartel. Okay, well, that's colluding against people who own multi-million-dollar paintings. That doesn't quite sound as bad, But there's lots of cartels that harm, just regular people and the poor. So that's something that we want to seriously, deter. So I think there's that gap right now. In the U.S., it's kind of accepted that, this is a very harmful activity that warrants the severe penalties that have been imposed, including incarceration. In Latin America, and I think in most of the rest of the world, it isn't yet at that point. It's kind of starting to be recognized that, this is unethical, something that's unlawful, but it's not really that bad. And, over time, I think, you get some important cases. It's a cartel in cement doesn't get the public upset. A cartel in retail pharmacies, as in Chile, does get the people upset. And so you kind of need more cases like that, and to get out in terms of the public eye, so where they started realizing that, geez, this is something that's really quite harmful and warrants having the bigger penalties.
That was just what I was going to ask before. At first, you told me about the industrial buyers, but there are also these regular people, buyers like all of us, that just go to buy a medicine and they found out that it is hugely and it's so overpriced. What would you say exactly to these people in order to realize that they have been, that there's not fair what they are experiencing? I mean, how would you not educate, but at least give some clues to these people for them to realize, hey, I mean, you don't have to accept this. I mean, go to in the copy and make your.
Yes. So let me think about this for a moment.
Okay.
It's the person on the street, can often misinterpret the source of high prices. And some countries have what's called excessive pricing laws. It's against the law to set too high a price. There's no such law in the U.S. But of course, and they may be upset when they see high prices, but that could be for all sorts of reasons.
Okay.
And here the issue is, well, okay, high prices for many reasons is perfectly lawful, but high prices because firms coordinated is not. Now, the final consumer really can't tell the difference between them. So I don't think they can play too much of a role in terms of, for example, discovering cartels. I think industrial buyers can.
Okay.
But as I said, their public support is really important for developing new rules and legislation to punish cartels and to provide more resources to competition authority and the like. And so I think quite honestly, journalism is a really important avenue for that. And to kind of really convey in terms of the harm that's being done. But as I said, people can, if they're told that this high price is due to a cartel, and that's what's important for them to learn, they experience it. So they know what the harm is. But what they have to kind of learn is that that high price is actually due to the cartel, and so that's up to the competition authority to pursue a case, and hopefully for the media outlets to pick it up and promote it.
Okay. Can you tell me please some other cases in that, I mean, you told me about the bread cartel in South Africa. What other, the pharmacy?
Right.
What other cases do you know in the region?
Okay, that affect the final consumers directly? Is that? Or
in general.
Oh, in general. Oh, let's see. As I said, there's many, probably every country has a cement cartel. So yes, it's out. Basically, there's three big areas where cartels are very common: cement, chemicals, and construction. Okay, so a lot of government procurement. When government decides, okay, we're going to build a road, or we're going to repair a bridge, they they set up a procurement auction, and have bidders bid on providing that service. Paving a road, for example, and it's supposed to go to the lowest bidder. Many of those procurement auctions have bidding rings. That is, the bidders have decided beforehand who's going to win and at what price. So that's a big area. Let's see. I mean, cartels. As I said, cartels are most common where the products are very similar, and I think the primary reason for that is that price competition is just so intense there, because consumers are largely basing their decisions about who to buy from based on price. And that causes this intense price competition. That then motivates firms to get rid of that price competition by colluding. You don't see it very often when the products are highly differentiated. You know, it's really with the more homogeneous goods.
Which is the case more that has not impacted, but that you remember the most? I mean, a particular case in general, in all the world.
Well, the case that's probably most well researched is the lysine case.
Lysine.
Lysine, L-Y-S-I-N-E.
L-Y-S?
L-Y-S-I-N-E. It's a chemical that's given to pigs or hogs to grow tissue. You make them bigger, okay? This so this case is really well known because there was an informant from the cartel who cooperated with the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the U.S. And then they helped.
I'm sorry.
And then he helped them actually videotape, just like this, meetings of the cartel in secret. Okay, and these videotapes are available from the Department of Justice. This was actually made into a film starring Matt Damon. So it was let's see, what was it called? It's called The Informant. The Informant, yes, which is based on a book written about the case. So that one is certainly it's the most fascinating case because the main individual here, Mark Whitaker, who Matt Damon plays in the film, is someone who has certain kind of psychological challenges. Okay, so at the same time that he's colluding, he's also embezzling money out of his company. You know, and so he ends up even though he's the one that cooperated with the authorities, he ended up with the longest jail sentence. So okay. So that's a fascinating case. The other one I said is the Fine Arts Auction Houses case with Christie's and Sotheby's, and once again there's a book written on that, and I guess what's really fascinating about that is because you know it involved a different class of consumers than typical. You know, usually it's final consumers in terms of purchasing bread or the like, or industrial buyers, but these were wealthy people who were selling their fine art and other highly valuable objects through these important historic institutions, Sotheby's and Christie's. And that collusion was done at the very highest level. So the chair of the board of Sotheby's met with the chair of the board of Christie's and decided to form a cartel.
Yes. So in conclusion, more severe.
That's right. If you want 3 words, they actually 4 words. Throw them in jail.
Throw them in jail. That's the main title.
That's right.
Thank you very much.